You ever wonder why you've never seen a movie about the resurrection? I mean, there are dozens of movies and TV series, TV specials about the life and passion of Jesus, but there's not one about the resurrection event itself. There have been any number of movies that show Jesus after he is risen, usually filmed from the back with kind of glowing lights, but nothing that shows the actual event. At least I can't think of one. There were no witnesses to the resurrection. We don't really understand how it happened. But still, volumes have been written about it for centuries. Unlike Christmas, Easter does not have a crazed shopping season preceding it. It does not have its own tree. It does not spawn wild office parties. It doesn't boast its own annual TV special for kids. No new albums from pop stars. It doesn't have its own ugly sweaters. It is not the date that most children and adults anticipate all year. We don't have dozens of songs played in malls, in places that don't even celebrate the holiday. Easter does not even have its own set date. But in the eyes of most Christians, Easter is the more important holiday. On December 25, Christians celebrate the Incarnation. In the birth of Jesus, God became human, or incarnate. And that's a miracle if there ever was one. Because Jesus' birth changed the way that people relate to God. Rather than seeing God as some far-off, distant, unapproachable being, some abstract philosophical or theological concept removed from time and place, God was now firmly in the world, inserted into human history. Some have called it the scandal of particularity. The idea that God became a particular person in a particular town, in a particular year, is shocking because things changed with Christmas. But everything changed with Easter. Easter changed everything for the followers of Jesus. The resurrection revealed for anyone who may have doubted, even after seeing him perform all sorts of miracles, who the itinerant carpenter from Nazareth really was. It showed that truly nothing is impossible for God. And it offered a preview of the kind of life that awaits all those who believe in him. We know so much about the experience of the resurrection, about how it changed a group of cowardly Galilean fishermen into a band of missionaries who proclaimed the good news unto their death. We know so much about the experience of the resurrection, about how an encounter with the risen Jesus turned a Pharisee named Saul into an apostle named Paul. We know so much about the experience of the resurrection, about how a small group of believers expelled from the synagogue spread to the four corners of the earth. We know so much about the experience of the resurrection, and yet we know nothing about it. It seems that how we experience the resurrection and relate to the risen Jesus is more important than the mechanics of the event itself. Early in the morning of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene finds herself in the garden and notices that the stone has been rolled away from the tomb. And she doesn't understand. And in her grief, she runs off to call the other disciples to come and to enter the tomb and to find it empty and to believe. Now notice, Jesus isn't even in the gospel. The focus is not on him. The focus is now on how people react to the event. And we know the rest of the story. After Simon Peter and the other disciple leave, Mary finds herself once again in the garden, this time alone. And she encounters the gardener, who asks her why she is weeping. Because they have taken away my Lord, she says. And then the gardener calls her by name, Mary. It is her encounter with the risen Jesus, a Jesus she does not recognize, that changes her life forever. We know the story of the two disciples walking on the road to Emmaus and how they encounter a stranger on the way, a stranger who does not seem to know what has been going on in Jerusalem, but who can touch the very depths of their hearts. And in the breaking of the bread, they recognize that they are in the presence of Jesus. And in that encounter, their lives are changed forever. We know the story of the disciples fishing on the shore of Lake Tiberias. They come across a cook who is grilling some fish over a charcoal fire. He asks them to bring some of their freshly caught fish and then offers them the kingdom of God for breakfast. And in that encounter, their lives are changed forever. There seems to be a conspiracy of gardeners, of cooks, and of strangers. The risen Jesus comes to us in ways that we do not understand, in ways that we can only imagine. And that's okay. I've had so many people tell me I don't understand the resurrection. Well, neither do I. But I do understand that I can meet a gardener or a stranger or a cook, and that the encounter can and has changed my life. Because the important thing is not necessarily understanding how the resurrection occurred. The important thing is responding to the invitation, to the encounter with the risen Lord. After all, the resurrection was an event that was plausible only because it was, and still is, impossible. If the resurrection were not something out of the ordinary, if the resurrection even made any sense, if we could actually explain it away, we would. And we would explain it with human means. But we can't. The fact that the resurrection is impossible, the fact that the resurrection makes no sense, means that it is of God and only of God. Because this is not something you can make up. Think about it. The central event of our entire belief system is something that we believe happened, but cannot prove it. There were no witnesses, and by any stretch of the imagination, it was an impossible occurrence. Talk about lack of evidence. But 2,000 years later, here we all are, commemorating an event that nobody understands, but one that has changed all of our lives forever, and the lives of countless millions through the centuries. Because these countless millions had an encounter with a gardener, with a cook, with a stranger. Quite a conspiracy. An encounter that changed lives to the point that we can say, yes, He is risen. He is risen indeed.